for this exam here, it's like a, and it just sort of dawned on me, it's like a learning funnel. So you've got these 330 learning outcomes and you've got all this information. Look, it's just so much information that you're trying to funnel it in. And when we say it's heuristic, it's when we get into that process where we're trying to problem solve, where we write, this is where we write the notes, we answer questions. And then after that, what happens is that we have an algorithm to describe these 330 learning outcomes. And the algorithm that we need to, that we finally figure out is that it's a short answer, MCQ, and Viva exam. And that's the way we need to funnel our knowledge. The key thing is that from getting from here to here for these 330 learning outcomes, I'm going to be honest with you, it takes 2 to 3 years, but we are expecting you to do it in 1 year. So just to review the structure of what we're going to do today, we're going to review the examiner's report for the next question and do a literature review, create an answer structure, and then write an answer to time. And so the question that we're going to run through is question 14 in September 2016, which is describe the principles of how a computer-controlled infusion device targets and maintains a constant effect site concentration of propofol. This is the examiner's report. So for a comprehensive answer, the following areas required attention. Description of the 3-compartment pharmacological model used for the effect site, target controlled infusion of propofol. Patient parameters for the different models in clinical practice and how they are used. How the infusion regime works to attain the desired target drug level, and commentary on accuracy, including those inherent to the algorithm, such as estimation of lean body mass and patient populations known not to fit the models well or suffer side effects. That is a lot to cover. And also then we also need to discuss the central role of KEO in the pharmacokinetic relationship between the central compartment and the effect site should be emphasized. Diagrams help to illustrate several of these points. So the following did not gain credit: a description of the general pharmacokinetics and dynamics of propofol, models for drugs other than propofol, and calculations of loading doses and infusion rates applicable to single compartment models or manual TIVA regimes, as opposed to TCI algorithms, which iteratively recalculate compartment drug levels and titrate infusion rates several times a minute. The reason why I've highlighted this in red is because the examiner doesn't want formulas just related to a single compartment. So from last week, we know that the loading dose equals your plasma concentration multiplied by your volume of distribution for a single compartment. And for a maintenance rate, it equals your elimination rate, where your elimination rate is your clearance multiplied by your concentration. The thing here is that we need to adapt those formulas for a multi-compartment model, which is what they use in TCI algorithms. So this is the summary of the examiner's report. So to get a pass, we need to describe the 3-compartment model for TCI and have the diagram, and then have the patient parameters for the different models, and how desired target levels are reached and maintained. And that would include the bolus and KEO, and also to acknowledge that it's an iterative process. And what that means is that it calculates and recalculates the formula every time for sort of multiple times a minute. The limitations of the model, we also need to add in. And then for a good pass or additional marks, just the level of detail for each of these components. So there's a lot of breadth to cover and also a lot of detail as well. For the literature review, what I've used are target control infusions and KO. And the main text that I've used, because it is complex enough already, is the one from chapter 26 in Miller's Anaesthesia. So I haven't used, there are other textbooks around which you can use, but I think that it does get a little bit complex because when you read the different texts, they do have different algorithms. But I think that Miller's summarizes it really well. And there is a lot of symmetry between what is written in Miller's and also what you can also find in other textbooks as well. And this is pretty much how I felt when studying about pharmacokinetics and pharmacokinetic modeling and KO. It's like going down a rabbit's hole, especially with the equations that they describe. So I warn you in terms of, when you read chapter 26 and you look at all those formulas, don't get too bogged down by the detail. The next couple of slides are the most important. And then what we're going to do is we are going to delve in deeper. And the reason I'm going to do that is just to introduce you to the concepts that are described in Miller's and what they mean. And that will allow you to understand and appreciate the concepts that they're describing. The aim of target-controlled infusions is to reach and maintain a therapeutic drug concentration at the effect site, also known as the biophase, without overshoot, using a three-compartment model where loading dose equals target plasma concentration multiplied by the volume of distribution at peak effect if you're using effect site targeting, or V1 if you're using plasma targeting. The other thing to note is that if you use target plasma concentration, that can be defined by the user, or it can also be calculated by the computer if you're using effect site targeting. Now, the maintenance dose. So the maintenance dose is your target plasma concentration multiplied by the clearance from V1 plus the distribution to V2 and V3. Now, the simple formula is that the target plasma concentration is multiplied by your clearance. But when we talk about multi-compartment models, it's not just clearance from your central compartment, but it's also distribution to V2 and V3. And this formula, which I've written here, is a simplification of the formula here. So this is your target plasma concentration multiplied by your central compartment multiplied by the rate constants. So these are the rate constants that are affecting your central compartment, which is K10, which is your clearance. And this exponential decay function describes the distribution to V2. And this exponential decay function describes the distribution to V3. And it's just a summary of what I've described here. So the target plasma concentration multiplied by the clearance from V1 plus the distribution to V2 and V3 would equal your maintenance dose rate. And that is an iterative process, which means that it gets calculated multiple times a minute. Quite simply, this is a three-compartment model. And just to summarize, this is the drug, and I is the input of the drug into the central compartment. K10 is the elimination rate constant from the central compartment, which represents the clearance from the central compartment. And then you've got distribution and redistribution to V2. So that represents as K12 and K21. And then distribution and redistribution to V3, which is K31 and K13. And then you've got your effect site, K1E and KO. So the volume distribution at 1 is called the central compartment, or V1. And then the volume distribution at steady state equals your volumes of your three compartments, so V1 plus V2 plus V3. The thing to note about this model, and I want you to just keep an eye on this, is the numbers that are here and the numbers that are represented in the model, in the models that we'll describe. So the Marsh, the Schneider, the Pediatric, and even in other models for other drugs, what you notice is that you'll have numbers for all of these except for K1E. And so even though K1E represents the movement of drug from the central to the effect site, it is not represented in any of the models that we're going to describe. And that goes back to the idea that the effect site is such a small compartment that what determines the time to equilibration and time to peak effect is not the transfer of drug from K1E, from the central compartment to the effect site, but rather from the elimination rate constant. But there is a relationship between these two, okay? But just know that K1E is not represented in any of the models. So the time to equilibration between effect site concentration and plasma concentration is based on the relationship T half KO equals 0.693 divided by KO, which means that a larger elimination rate constant equals a faster time to equilibration, and a smaller KO equals a slower time to equilibration. This is a diagram which shows that if you use an infusion with plasma target concentration, what it does is it reaches the target site quickly and then it just maintains it at that state. But as you can see, the effect site equilibration, it takes 3 to 5 T half KOs, which is approximately about 300 to 400 seconds. So the example that you might give is that in the Schneider model, the Schneider model has a KO of 0.456. And if we know that T half KO equals 0.693 divided by 0.56, that will equal, just using my calculator, about 1.5 minutes, which means that to reach equilibration times 3 is about 4.5 minutes, which is approximately about 300 seconds. Okay, so that's about right. So you can see at this point here, it starts reaching equilibration. Now, we don't want a system to reach equilibration in 4.5 to 5 minutes. We would prefer it if it reached the effect site concentration a lot faster. So what we can do is we can do bolus dosing. And this is just a simple idea of just using the bolus dose itself. So this is the graph from last week, which just describes bolus dose pharmacokinetics, where it's an exponential decay function. And the KO determines the time to peak effect. So with a large KO, you can see that the time to peak effect is quicker and higher, because remember that at the effect site, the KO does not affect the concentration there. So all that matters is the time to equilibration. So a large KO means a faster time to equilibration. And for a bolus dose, because it equilibrates faster, it reaches a higher plasma concentration, okay? Versus a smaller KO, which takes longer to equilibrate, it equilibrates at a lower concentration. So the way that we overcome the long or the 3 to 5 half-lives is to use a bolus dose with overshoot, and then plus an infusion dosing to reach your effect site concentration quicker. And you'll see this when you use the effect site with Schneider. What you'll see is that if you say you have a effect site target of 4, the Schneider model will actually deliver a plasma concentration, or calculate that it needs to target a plasma concentration of approximately 8 or double, okay? Or in other words, it just needs to overshoot, which it's doing here. So it's overshooting so that the effect site reaches its target a lot quicker. So instead of reaching it at 300 seconds, it's able to reach it in about 1.5 minutes, okay? Now the Marsh model. So the Marsh model, the way to remember it is that V1, V2, and V3 are weight-based, and all the rate constants are fixed. The limitations are that the original model, which is the one in most hospitals, only offers plasma target concentration. There are newer ones out there which will offer effect site target concentration, but the ones that you'll see in most hospitals only do plasma. It's not suitable for ages less than 16, and it has weight limitations less than 30 or more than 150. And that is just a protection against underdosing and also overdosing as well, because V1, V2, and V3 are weight-based. What I'm going to do is at the end, I'm going to show you a table with all these numbers here, and then we're going to find a pattern for all of them so that we can easily remember and recall this. With Schneider, V1, V3, and the rate constants from V1, V3, so K13 and K31 are all fixed. V2 is adjusted for age, and so K12 and K21 are also adjusted for age. K10, which is your elimination rate constant from the central compartment, is adjusted for lean body mass, weight, and height. And note that lean body mass already includes the parameters of weight, height, and also includes gender in the calculation. So if you remember that the lean body mass is affecting K10, you can naturally add that the weight and height also are going to be used to calculate K10. The limitations here are that only target effect site concentration should be used. The reason for that is that if you use plasma targeting, Schneider model has a fixed V1 at 4.27 liters. So if you use the calculation dose equals your target plasma concentration multiplied by your volume of distribution, having such a small volume of distribution means that you risk having a small induction dose or underdosing. Now, it's not suitable for ages less than 16. And the other thing to note is limited by your BMI. So BMI more than 42 in men and more than 35 in women, as the lean body mass formula paradoxically creates a low lean body mass for these patients. In other words, there's a potential for underdosing. Now, with the lean body mass formula used in Schneider, so they used what's called James's formula, which is a negative quadratic formula because of the function here, -128 multiplied by total body weight divided by height squared. You don't need to know this formula, but you do need to know how it functions, which means that at a cut-off limit, you can see that your lean body mass starts dropping, which is why they have limits with weight when you put in Schneider, and it's dependent on your BMI. So again, for males, it's a BMI more than 42, and for women, it's a BMI more than 35. With pediatrics, there are two models out there. So there's the Kataria and there's the Ped-Fuser. So the Kataria V1, V2, and V3 are all based on weight, where the rate constants are fixed, and the limitations are it's for ages 3 to 16. The Ped-Fuser has V1, V2, V3, and K10 are based on weight, where the rate constants, except for K10, are all fixed. It is considered more accurate than Kataria, and this is the one you will see being used more commonly around hospitals, okay? And the limitations of this are that it's only used for ages 1 to 16. Now, I want you to know the next couple of slides, they're a lot more technically difficult. You don't need to know it, but more so as in appreciate it, just so that when you read chapter 26 in Miller's, it makes sense to you and that you appreciate the concepts which they are describing. So delving deeper, the bolus dose response and infusion dose response can be described as the relationship between the input and the concentration of plasma, and that's for your bolus dose response relationship. And the relationship after that with the effect site has to do with the relationship between the plasma concentration and the effect site concentration. Just note the terminology that I've used here, which is also a source of confusion, and I've just updated this in your notes. The reason why it's confusing is that when you've got brackets here, so these little brackets, that's a function of time. What is confusing is that the normal nomenclature that we use for target plasma and target effect site also includes a T. So you'll see this being used, CTP and CTE. Okay, so this is target, and this is a function of time. Right. This is something that a lot of trainees will describe when they describe pharmacokinetic models. So describe it as a mono-exponential followed by a poly-exponential function. So and this is for a bolus dose response. So a mono-exponential, where the concentration is described by A, which is the concentration at time 0, as a function of Euler's constant to the power of minus the elimination rate constant multiplied by time. And that's your exponential decay function. What has been shown with pharmacokinetic modeling is that a poly-exponential function describes the time course of drugs a lot more accurately because of the different compartments involved. So they'll often use 3 exponential functions, A, B, C, with the rate constants alpha, beta, and gamma. So you've got 3 exponential decay functions. And it's graphed like this, where these 3 exponential decay functions are added up to finally graph this final exponential decay. Okay. And what do they represent? So A has been commonly called to represent the distribution or the distribution half-life. B represents the elimination half-life. And then C represents the terminal half-life. And note that these are straight lines. So what they've done is they've differentiated these equations. So they're getting the rate of change. So this is the rate of change for A. This is the rate of change for B. And this is the rate of change for the exponential function of C. Okay. And then this is what they represent: the distribution, elimination, and the terminal half-life. So this is for a bolus dose. But what about infusion dosing? This is where it gets quite complex. So this is the formula that they've used to calculate infusion dosing, where the concentration with respect to time equals the input of the drug, which is a bolus and infusion or infusion rate, or just an infusion rate itself. And this is not a multiplication. This is called convolution, which is a convolution of the summation of the exponential decay functions, or what's called the disposition of the drug. So the disposition of the drug describes what happens to the drug in that compartment. And it's a function of both clearance and distribution.
So just to summarize, when we're looking at this function here, which describes the disposition of the drug, if we think back to the previous formula, this represents the summation, this sigma. The n number on top represents the number of exponential functions. And that's often 3. And then this at the bottom, which is your index, equals 1, and that represents your starting number. So that's what they mean. And they've got your exponential decay function, which is your concentration at time 0 multiplied by Euler's number to the power of a rate constant multiplied by time. And so what you would have is you would have several of these functions like this. Okay,
That's what this function means, the disposition of the drug, which can be simply
summarized as D with respect to time.
And so the way to summarize it is that the concentration with respect to time for a bolus and infusion dosing is a function of your infusion and the disposition of the drug.
This here is not a multiplication. It's called convolution.
What does convolution mean? So just quickly, convolution is the integral of the product of two functions. What do I mean by that? And it's in a linear time invariant system. So I've got a couple of diagrams here below, and we will say that the input with respect to time is called the input signal, and concentration with respect to time is called the output signal. In the middle, we've got the disposition of the drug with respect to time, which is called a linear time invariant system. So this is a linear time invariant system. And what this does is it transforms the input signal to the output signal. So in other words, the input signal comes into here and it gets transformed by the function here into the output signal. What do they mean by a linear time invariant system?
So if we look at the input signal, what I've done is I've just said that this is a bolus dose, which is you head up quickly and then after that you go down. Okay, and by giving a bolus dose at time 0, you've got the disposition of the drug, which looks like an exponential decay function, and then the output is an exponential decay function. And so a linear time invariant system will say that, let's say you delay the input of the drug. So let's say you deliver it only at a 5-minute mark. Okay, so this is your bolus of the drug. What this does is that the input signal will get transformed by your disposition, but your output signal, because it's happening at the 5-minute mark, will happen here. Okay, at the 5-minute mark. So that's why it's called a linear time invariant system, is that it changes depending on when you give the drug, and it happens proportionately to when you give the drug. The other thing about the system is that if you double the dose, so let's say from here you double the dose here, what you'll see is that this is the transformation. What you get at the end is that you get double the dose here. Okay, your concentration should double.
And that's why it's not as simple as a multiplication. It's the combining of two formulas together to create a third formula. And the way they do that is they integrate the product of these two functions. It's too complex to reproduce, but I think it is good to appreciate what it means, especially when they describe it in the text. So simply, the concentration with respect to time equals the input of the drug as a convolution of the disposition of the drug. And that has time invariance, that also has linearity. So if you double the dose, you double the concentration. And it's got another property called superposition, which means that the response can be calculated by summing the individual inputs in a multi-compartment model. And that is represented by the different exponential decay functions, A, B, and C. The most important bit here is this equation up on top, where the concentration of drug with respect to time equals the input of the drug as a function of the disposition of the drug. In other words, what happens to the drug after it gets delivered. So the way that the algorithm calculates the infusion rate is that what they do is they get your target concentration, and this symbol here is the deconvolution. So it's not divide, it's the deconvolution of the disposition function. In other words, that if we want to solve for the input, we need to say that the input of the drug equals your concentration or whatever you're targeting. And then they'll have this, which is the opposite of convolution of the disposition with respect to time. Okay. And then where the disposition of the drug is described by this formula here, which it's a function of both the clearance, so K10, as well as the distribution to the different compartments. So K12, K21, and then K31 and K13. Okay, so the maintenance dose rate equals your target plasma concentration multiplied by the clearance from V1 plus the distribution to V2 and V3. How about the effect side? So the formula that we've described for the plasma, so the concentration equals the input as a convolution of the disposition, and it's very similar. So now we're saying that the concentration at the biophase is a function of the concentration at the plasma, which represents the input, as a convolution of the disposition at the biophase. Okay, so that's what each one represents, where the disposition of the biophase is a function of your elimination rate constant. And if you note the elimination rate constant here, this describes the rate of change. So remember that when we talk about an exponential function, it's a constant with Euler's constant to the exponent of negative rate constant times time. So this is A with respect to T equals AO. And then if you want to find the rate of change, so dA with respect to time, it's minus KE minus KT. And that is the rate of change. So as you can see, because the biophase is such a small compartment, what matters of that reaching the, or how it calculates the effect site concentration is to describe it as the rate of change formula. And the most important thing that you should acknowledge is that the importance of KO in this. You don't need to describe it as such, but it just tells you how important the elimination rate constant is when we discuss the time to peak effect as well as the time to equilibration for the effect site. Now there's a paragraph here in Miller's which is really interesting, because I've always said that KO was the most important number to determine time to peak effect. But now we're going to introduce one more concept, which is what happens with the pharmacokinetics in the central compartment. So the first line says, if a constant plasma concentration is maintained, then the time required for the biophase concentration to reach 50% of the plasma concentration, T half KO, can be calculated as 0.693 divided by your elimination rate constant. That sentence there, easy, no argument with that. And this is just a summary of the slide from last week, where when we look at the time to equilibration of the effect site concentration with the plasma concentration is based on the elimination or equilibration rate constant. So you can call it either, or rather KO, or it is the 3 to 5 half-lives of your T half KO. So this is for infusion at steady state. In other words, for a KO that is small, it will take longer to equilibrate versus a KO that is a lot larger, which will equilibrate a lot faster. Now, this is the second line here. So after a bolus dose, the time to peak biophase concentration is a function of both plasma pharmacokinetics and KO. For drugs with a very rapid decline in plasma concentration after a bolus, for example, adenosine with a half-life of several seconds, the effect site concentration peaks within several seconds of the bolus, regardless of KO. For drugs with a rapid elimination rate constant and a slow decrease in concentration after a bolus injection, for example, pancuronium, the peak effect site concentration is determined more by KO than by plasma pharmacokinetics. It's a lot to digest, and just to summarize, what it's saying is that if you have a drug which gets cleared from the plasma or gets eliminated from the plasma rapidly, the time to peak effect is based more on plasma pharmacokinetics than KO. But for most drugs, it is KO that is the most important. And for drugs that have a slow decrease in concentration, the effect of KO is even more pronounced. I'm going to show you some examples. So this is the diagram that I've always referred to. So you have a bolus dose with an exponential decay function, and you've got different KOs. So with a large KO, you've got a faster time to equilibration. And then with a smaller KO, you've got a longer time to equilibration. But what happens if KO is fixed, but the rate constants, alpha, beta, and gamma, change in the function in this poly-exponential function? And remember that this represents distribution, elimination, and your terminal elimination half-life. It's really A and B that are going to be the most important. So in other words, we're increasing your elimination and increasing your distribution. So if we do that, what happens? And we fix KO. So if we increase the distribution and increase the elimination, we actually have a faster time to peak effect. But again, it's just that analogy of having a smaller mountain, but we've got a lower concentration at which the effect site will equal plasma. And there is a decreased effect of the elimination rate constant on the time to peak effect. Let me draw this graphically. So this is that original graph. And now we've got a drug which is eliminated and distributed from the central compartment rapidly, which means that it reaches a lower peak. So this is the original one. And then this is the new one with the
increased distribution, increased elimination, it reaches a lower peak. And as you can see, the exponential decay function is a lot more rapid. Okay. And you can see for the different KOs, so where they meet up with the plasma, so here, here, and here, you can see that they all pretty much have a time to peak effect of around this area here. Okay, so this is your time to peak effect. In other words, the plasma pharmacokinetics has a lot more of a role to play with the time to peak effect rather than the KO. So just to sort of summarize again, with a KO 0.8, it doesn't reach up here. So what it will do is with a KO 0.8, it will come up to here, and after that, it will hit down. With a KO 0.2, it will reach here, and after that, it will hit down. Okay, but you can see that the time to peak effect happens around the same time. Now, conversely, if you decrease your alpha, beta, and gamma constants, or you decrease your distribution and decrease your elimination, you'll have a slower time to peak effect, but a higher concentration at which your effect site equals plasma. And there is an increased effect of your elimination rate constant on time to peak effect. So graphically, what I've done is, this is your original exponential decay function. Now we're saying that there's reduced distribution and reduced elimination, which means that you reach a higher concentration and your exponential decay function is a lot flatter. Now, if we look at the KO of 0.8, what happens is that this will reach here, okay? And then after that, it will hit down. With a KO of 0.4, what will happen is that it will reach here, and then after that, it will hit down. And then with a KO of 0.2, it will come up here, and then after that, come down. What you can see is that the time to peak effect is different. And you can see that it's largely affected by KO. So that's what that paragraph means, is that with drugs that are rapidly cleared and have a large distribution, it is the plasma pharmacokinetics that has more to do with the time to peak effect. So this one here. And then for most other drugs, with a normal exponential decay, it is the KO which largely determines the time to peak effect or the time to equilibration. Now, finally, this is a summary of the TCI propofol systems that we use. And the way that I think is a really good way to memorize this is to look for patterns. These are the three that I would memorize: Marsh, Schneider, and Pediatric. You don't need to know Kataria, although it's fairly simple to know as well. What you notice is that with the Marsh and with the Pediatric, they are all varied by weight. So V1, V2, V3 are all varied by weight. The Schneider model has V1 and V3 fixed, and only V2 is varied by age. The important number here to know is that the V1 in Schneider is fixed at 4.27, so that when you calculate a loading dose using plasma target concentration and using 4.27, you'll get a relatively small dose. These are the rate constants. The nice thing about this is that Marsh, they're all constants. They don't change. With Schneider, K10 is varied by your lean body mass, weight, and height. K12 is varied by age, and K21 is also varied by age. But K13 and K31 are constant. The way to remember this with Schneider is that, so with Schneider, given that V2 is varied by age, it should prompt you to say that K12 and K21 are also varied by age. That would be the connection that you would make to be able to memorize that, okay? And K10 is varied by your lean body mass, and because you know it's varied by your lean body mass, that will give you the hint that it's also varied by weight and height as well. And finally, the ped fuser has K10, which is varied by weight. Otherwise, everything else is fixed. With the Schneider model, it has a KO of 0.456. And it's got a calculated time to peak effect of 1.69. And just know that this is a function of both the pharmacokinetics as well as the KO as well. All right. Now, the propofol model has a KO of 0.26, and you can see that it's a lot smaller than the Schneider model, because propofol was, the Marsh model was never designed for effect site targeting. And we know that with a smaller KO, it means that it will have a longer time to equilibration or a longer time to peak effect. So it's got an asterisk here because you won't see this published in a lot of Marsh models. So when you look at your TCI, those pumps that you have in theatre, you can actually look and find out what the rate constants they use, or what the formulas are that they use on those pumps. And you'll note that that 0.26 may not be published on the Marsh model in your pump because they don't offer effect site targeting. But if they do, this is the one that has been calculated. And in fact, there is a newer version of Marsh model which has KO, which allows you to calculate effect. And that has a much larger number. I think it's about 1.2. So you can see that how, this number that they use, it's a mathematical concept that they calculate to look and determine what they see at the effect site. And the effect site is, you can't measure the effect site, but what you do is you correlate it with your BIS. So the general structure for this answer would be to describe the aims of target control infusions, how target levels are reached for these TCI algorithms using the loading dose and maintenance dose. And we need to make sure that we need to make it more complex than just single compartment models, okay? We then need to draw a diagram of the three-compartment model and describe the time to equilibration and KO, and then have a summary of the TCI models and the limitations. And the ones that I will use are Marsh, Schneider, and the ped fuser. So grab your pens, and then we're going to have 10 minutes running a practice SAQ on this. All right, everyone ready? All right. So let's go. So I'm going to just structure it in terms of aim. I'm going to have my diagram here. I'm going to talk about equilibration and KO. And then on my third page, I'm going to talk about TCI models. So the aim and calculations. So the aim is to reach and maintain target concentration, which can either be plasma, CTP, or effect site, CTE without overshoot using a 3-compartment model where loading dose equals CTP, which is either user or computer calculated, multiplied by your volume of distribution at V1 if you use target plasma concentration, or peak effect. Peak effect if we're using effect site concentration. And then the maintenance dose equals your target plasma concentration multiplied by your clearance from V1 plus your distribution to V2 and V3. And this is an iterative process calculated several times a minute. Draw my diagram here. I have V1, I have input of drug, V2, V3, my effect site here. This is K10, K12, K21, K13, K31, K1E, KEO. So time to equilibration between the effect site and plasma is based on the relationship T12 KO equals 0.693 divided by KO, so that a larger elimination rate constant equals a faster time to equilibration, and a smaller KO equals a slower time to equilibration. And equilibration occurs at 3 to 5 times your T12 KO with infusion dosing. Therefore, to reach your target effect site quicker, bolus with overshoot of your plasma concentration is used. And we can quickly draw a diagram. I've got time here, and I've got concentration in mics per mil, 0 to 8, 200, 400, 600 seconds. And then we've got, let's say we have an effect site of 4. So this is your effect site. And with your plasma, you want to have, show that you want to have overshoot. So, and then it reaches plasma like this. So this is plasma. And this is effect site. All right, so now I'm going to talk about the TCI model. So TCI models, we're going to talk about a Marsh, Schneider, and the Ped fuser. So the Marsh model, V1, V2, V3 are based on weight, rate constants are fixed. The limitations, so target plasma concentration only in the original mode, not for ages less than 16, and weight less than 30 kilograms or more than 150 kilograms. With Schneider, V1, V3, which means that K13 and K31 are fixed. Therefore, should only be used in effect site mode. Otherwise, small induction dose. If you use it in plasma mode, as a V1 is fixed at 4.27 liters. V2 and therefore K12 and K21 are adjusted for age. K10 is adjusted for lean body mass, weight, and height. Limitations. So again, not for ages less than 16 or BMI more than 42 in males and or more than 35 in females. I'll just put asterisks here due to use of James's LBM formula, which creates paradoxical low lean body mass. And find the Pediatric V1, V2, V3, and K10 based on weight, more accurate than Qatari model. All right, I think I'm pretty happy with that. That's it. 9 minutes there, 9 minutes. You guys can continue writing if you need. So. But when you look at it, the Qatari and the Pediatric are actually very simple. So they're all weight based. They're similar to Marsh. And the thing that you could just say is that Pediatric is a lot more accurate than Qatari. And that's pretty much it. And that it's validated for children or for ages 1 to 16. Correct. He did mention it. The examiner did mention it in their report to talk about error rates. So there's 2 error rates that you'll see. You'll see your median dose performance error and your median dose absolute performance error. So it's called MDPE and MDAPE. What you want is the MDAPE, because when you use your median performance error, what that means is that if you overshoot and undershoot and you average it out, it could be quite close to the middle. Does that make sense? So if you this is your target and you have got a model which overshoots and undershoots, and then you calculate what the average is, it sort of comes towards the middle and you go, oh, it's actually pretty good. But the median, the MDAPE, which is the absolute performance error,
what it does is it takes the difference between the two. So if it doesn't perform well on either side, it looks at it, and most models will perform within 20%. But what it means when you got your median dose performance error, it means that 50% of patients will be within 20% of that target plasma concentration, or that target, effect site concentration. Okay. Which means that the other 50% are going to have a variation of more than 20%.